The Disciplines Essential in the Spiritual Aspirant, Part 7, Sri Muruganar, translated and presented by Robert Butler.
கடையாம் எனை நின் கருணை குறிதா உடையாய் உளம் என் உழை நங்கியல தடையாதும் இலேன் சரணம் சரணத்திடை ஆர்வமளித்து என்னை ஆழ்பரனே கடையாமெனை நின் கருணை குறிதா உடையாய் உளம் என் உழை நங்கியல தடையாதும் இலேன் சரணம் சரணத்து இடை ஆர்வமளித்து என்னையாள் பரனே பரனே பரனேயே.
Lowest of the low as I may be, as one worthy of your grace, hold me. There is in my heart not the least impediment to the workings of your divine intent. So in the refuge of your holy feet, Supreme Lord, rule over me and to me your divine love afford.
Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana. So we'll start with verse 19 today. Anant, please.
மனத்தை போல விபத்தை அற்றது வேறில்லை. அதன் காட்சி அறவே நம்பத்தக்கதன்று. வியபச்சரித்திலே மனத்தின் சுபாவம். அற்றம் பார்த்து சாதகனை காலை வாரிவிட்டு விஷயங்களில் பாயும். மனம் உயிர்த்திருக்கும் அளவும் அதன் குணமும் மாறாது. எனவே இடையரா தியான விசாரங்களால் மனத்தை அடியோடு அழிக்க வேண்டும். அவ்வாறு கெடுக்கும் வரை அறிஞனவனும் கிருதகிருத்தியனாக அமைதியுறல் ஆகாது.
Robert.
There is nothing so unstable as the mind. Its appearance is entirely untrustworthy. The mind's very nature is to deceive and mislead. At the very first opportunity, it will hogtie the spiritual practitioner and plunge into the world of phenomena. As long as it exists, its nature will never change. Therefore, it must be destroyed at the root through unrelenting meditation based on inquiry. Until it is thus eradicated, no wise person should be at ease, assuming that his task is complete.
Thank you. With regards to this Neṟi, Robert made this comment. The mind is a chameleon, a shapeshifter. It will do anything to prolong its own existence. It typically does not take the spiritual practitioner long to become convinced intellectually of the mind's fundamental unreality. But the mind recognizes this and acts very cleverly. It admits to the spiritual practitioner that it is itself the problem, but then puts itself forward as the one most capable of tracking down and getting rid of itself. And there is a quote from Bhagavan on 20th July 1936, where the devotee asked how to check the mind, to which Bhagavan responded,
Will a thief betray himself? Will the mind find itself? The mind cannot seek the mind. You have ignored what is real and are holding onto the mind which is unreal and also trying to find what it is. Was there a mind in your sleep? It was not. It is now here. It is therefore impermanent. Can the mind be found by you? The mind is not you. You think you are the mind and therefore ask me how it is checked. If it is there, it can be checked, but it is not. Understand this truth by search. Search for unreality is fruitless. Therefore seek the reality, that is to say, the self. That is the way to rule over the mind. There is only one thing real.
Right. And there is a quote from Sage Thai Manawa. Robert, you want to go ahead and present that, please?
Yes. Why are you wandering, mind? How have you lost your grip on the truth you were taught, telling you to be quiet? Like wrestlers engaged in a bout, you keep on wrangling with me. What have you understood? What have you learned? Go away.
Right. So do you have any other comments on this?
Well, this is a device used by several of the Tamil and other Indian saints to, in a rather amusing way, to distinguish the underlying beingness that we are from the mind that rises in it, which causes the underlying beingness all the trouble. So Tamana has realized, presumably Tamana has realized, but he's putting himself in the position of the unrealized aspirant here. And he's saying to the mind, the awareness is saying to the mind, why do you give me all this trouble? Well, I know instinctively that I am the truth, but you keep on wandering off into the world of phenomena.
Right. So that's good. With that, let's go on to the next Neṟi. Anand, please.
பிறப்பு இறப்பு என்பது பேதமை கனவு. பிறப்போடு இறப்பென்னும் சித்த விகார கலக்கம் எனவும், மரணம் பிறப்பு என்று இவை இரண்டின் மயக்கம் எனவும் மாணிக்க வாசகமறை ஓதல் காண்க. I'll read it again. பிறப்பு இறப்பு என்பது பேதமை கனவு. பிறப்போடு இறப்பென்னும் சித்த விகார கலக்கம் எனவும், மரணம் பிறப்பென்றிவை இரண்டின் மயக்கம் எனவும் மாணிக்க வாசகமறை ஓதல் காண்க.
Robert.
What is called birth and death is a dream born of ignorance. See how Manikavachaga in his Tamil Vedas speaks of the confusion of the mental flux known as birth and death, and the delusion of these two known as birth and death.
So see how Manikavasa in his Tamil Vedas speaks of the confusion of the mental flux known as birth and death, and the delusion of these two known as birth and death. So now we need to see what exactly Manikavasa said in his work, and the Tamil Veda that he's referring to. What book is that, Robert? Is that Kodumbi?
It's Kutumbi. It's
Yeah.
it's hymn 10, I think, of the 51.
Okay. And so this is the verse that Muruganar is referring to in his Neṟi. You want to read that, please?
In these verses, the devotee is basically addressing his soul to go and join with Lord Shiva, figuratively, in other words, to merge with him. And it goes like this: he cleared away the confusion of the changeful mind's illusion, in which we come to birth and die in an insane world with children, wife, family, learning, and wealth piled up high. So to our wise Lord do you now hie, and hymn this song, O dragonfly.
So what is that dragonfly? Why is he addressing to dragonfly? Just wondering.
It's a a convention of the early Agam poetry to
okay.
In some of the early poems, the hero who's missing his lady friend addresses a bee, and bids it go and speak to his lover is far away. So a way of the devotee feels very far away from the Lord. So he imagines he's sending this dragonfly to speak to Shiva and speak on his behalf and get his grace.
That's good. So he cleared away the confusion of the changeful mind's illusion, in which we come to birth and die. In an insane world with children, wife, family, learning, and wealth piled up high. And so to our wise Lord, to you now high, and hymn this song. It's really nice. So we have an illustration here to explain this further. And let me get started. Go ahead, Robert. Can you explain this, please?
Yes. In a way, Bhagavan and Manikavachika are saying the same thing, but Manikavachika is saying it in a very poetic way. But if we analyze the last verse, we see that the elements of it correspond exactly to what Bhagavan labels and tells us to practice as self-attention. So first of all, just imagine or just feel your being is just being. There's nothing there. It's like a calm ocean. This state occurs in deep sleep. It occurs in those brief moments between when our racing minds go quiet for an instant, and various other instances in life when we have peak experiences where we experience the loss of objective transitive awareness. So imagine this is the pure peace, the peace of the deep sleep, the peace of no thought, just abidance. But in this thought, in this sea, this calm sea, a wave arises, which manifests, Manikavachika calls it confusion, but the confusion is mistaking the ego for the self. So the ego rises up, the idea that one is not part of the self. Little wave thinks it's not part of the ocean. We all know that every wave is part of the ocean, but when the ego rises up, it says, no, I'm a wave, I'm not the ocean. So the ego rises.
So that's the fundamental problem, the ego.
Yes, it's not really. A lot of what we discuss mentions the mind, but it means the ego mind. Mind is not about, there is something it's the pure mind, and the pure mind is that which puts us on the path to investigating in the first place. So there is pure mind, and we were saying before, can you practice? Well, you can practice with the pure mind, but eventually the pure mind's annihilated, like the stick that stirs the funeral pyre. So in fact, Robert was quite correct. That there is, and Michael, there is practice at a certain point, but the practice is the pure mind turning towards the self, in which it becomes annihilated. So in fact, both sides of the argument are in a sense correct. But of course, anyway.
Okay. So the ego rises, and then go ahead.
The ego rises and identifies with what it thinks is an outside world. So the mind and the world arise together. And then in this world, we see ourselves being born and dying. Also, birth and death arises, and in a world which appears to us quite insane, because we are not connected with the self, it doesn't make any sense to us. So at that point, we need some kind of clarification. We need to cling on to the Lord in Manikavachika's terms, or to perform dwelling on the self in Bhagavan's terms. And when we do that, if we do it with the pure mind, something happens. We get clearing away of that confusion, of that sense of confusion.
Right. That's a kalakam telivittal, right? Removal of confusion.
And that undermines this whole house of cards, which is grown up. The ego, the mind,
Ego goes off.
the world, the whole thing goes, and then the very idea of clarity and confusion goes, and we're back in the self. And that is what happens to us really every second of our lives. We're never away from the self, but the thoughts, Bhagavan compares it to, you know, when you have a burning stick and you whirl it round and round, you just see a red ring.
Yeah.
Yeah, but really there is only this one point going really fast, but because the mind is revolving so fast, we can't see that it's just a single point of light, and we see it as a circle.
Right. Well, that's good. That's a good illustration of the concept here. Thank you, Robert. And let's go to the next Neṟi, 21. Anand, please.
முழு முதலான கடவுள் அகண்டாத்வைத பரவெளி வடிவராதலால் அவர் தமக்கு அந்நியம் ஒன்றும் அறியார். அவர் ஸ்வரூபமான அப்பூரண சுத்த சைதன்யமே திருவருள் உண்மையா. I'll read it again. முழு முதலான கடவுள் அகண்டாத்வைத பரவெளி வடிவராதலால் அவர் தமக்கு அந்நியம் ஒன்றும் அறியார். அவர் ஸ்வரூபமான அப்பூரண சுத்த சைதன்யமே திருவருள் உண்மையாம்.
Thank you. By the way, these are all, the Tamil is all Muruganar's own handwriting. We were able to get a copy of his original manuscript and share it with the devotees. Robert, you want to read the English translation, please?
The form of the primordial God is the undivided, non-dual, infinite expanse of consciousness. Therefore, he knows nothing that is other than himself. The real nature of divine grace is only that all-embracing, pure awareness that is his very nature.
Yeah. So there are, in this Neṟi, Sri Muruganar makes 3 statements, and let's just look at this one by one. First, he is saying, the form of the primordial God is the undivided, non-dual, infinite expanse of consciousness. So this reminds us of a verse from Upadesa Undiya, verse 28, where he says, Tanadiyal yadana tantirhir pin anadi ananda sat undipara ahanda siddhananda mundipara. So, which means, Robert?
If one knows what the nature of oneself is, then what remains is beginningless, endless, and unbroken existence, awareness, bliss.
Yeah. So if one knows what the nature of oneself is, then what remains is the beginningless, endless, and unbroken existence, awareness, and bliss. And then in the next sentence of this Neṟi, Muruganar goes on to say, therefore, he knows nothing that is other than himself. Meaning there is really no two. And here again, it reminds us of verse 26 of Upadesa Undiya, where Bhagavan says, go ahead, please, Robert.
Being oneself alone is knowing oneself, because oneself is devoid of two.
Yeah, there is no two. And so by devoid of two, that is, devoid of the fundamental duality of subject and object, knower and the thing known, and also devoid of any possibility of being divided as two selves, one self as a subject to know the other self as an object. So there simply is no two. And that's the point that Muruganar stresses in his Neṟi, and Bhagavan, beautifully says in this verse of Upadesa Undiya. And finally, in that Neṟi, Muruganar says, the real nature of divine grace is only that all-embracing, pure awareness that is his very nature. Could you comment on that, please, Robert?
Well, what Muruganar is saying here is that grace is not something that is conferred upon us by the Guru. Grace is our nature, and the Guru, Bhagavan, as the self, enables us to identify our real nature as grace, as the self, for ourselves. So he's trying to dispel the idea that grace is something that has to be got. It's something that has to be realized as our very nature. I'll just give a little quote from Talks 157 on the 9th of February 1936. Grace is the beginning, middle, and end. Grace is the self. Because of the false identification of the self with the body, the Guru is considered to be with body. But from the Guru's outlook, the Guru is only the self. The self is one only. He tells that the self alone is. Is not the self then your Guru? Where else will grace come from? It is from the self alone. Manifestation of the self is a manifestation of grace, and vice versa. So basically, grace and the self are the same. In a way, grace is the self in action. If we wanted to say the self did anything, the self always wants us to be, if it had a mind, it would want us to be realized. So grace is the active aspect of the self as it pulls us towards it. So it's our true nature. Grace and the self are the same, just seen from different aspects.
Because self itself, there's no action in self itself. I think that's from the perspective of the jiva, right? When you say self in action, from his perspective, the pouring forth of the pull of self, to pull towards self, is what you call grace.
Yes, I mean there's no action on the part of the self. You're quite right. Yeah. It's just the way the jiva would.
But that's but from jiva perceives it that way. So, which is it's just a different way of stating it. That's really nice, because a lot of people are confused what really grace is, and you think the quote and your explanation brings that out.
I think in many places Bhagavan deliberately equates the self with grace, because he's very aware of the fact that people came to him as if they could obtain grace from him, and he never tired saying that they already had the grace, they just had to find it within themselves,
right?
But through their own efforts, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Any questions or comments? Anand, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, often it's so clear. And no, I don't see anything, other than what's said so beautifully.
Right.
But we might put in, because you're very keen on stressing the idea of love, and that's what it is. This grace is love, but it's not anybody loving somebody else. It's like the self is love, the self is grace, the self is being. Right. But your emphasis on love is correct, because love is basically the root of all.
Right. Yeah, the self, the love, the truth, the chit and ananda, the knowledge, and all of them are just various names for the same being. So, right. So awareness is chit, is ananda. Awareness is also all the knowledge. So love is part and parcel of that package. You can call it by any other name. Grace is also truth. Grace is also love.
Right. Well, thank you.